Hello and welcome to another episode with John Smallwood. Now, if you've been listening to the podcast, one of the things that you'll realize very quickly is the way that John and his team really look at financial services and financial advice is not necessarily as conventional as other people. And there are a lot of times where they challenge some very tightly, closely held truths, and I'm air quoting there. And today is going to be no different. So John today is going to talk about Social Security and when you should take it. And when we were prepping for this, he was running through some numbers just to kind of give me a preview of the podcast. And this is quite eye-opening. So John, enlighten us on Social Security.
Okay. So Social Security is probably one of the biggest decisions that is being discussed right now in the financial community. About 12 years ago, my father and I were running seminars on Social Security optimization, and the interest was low. The problem was the baby boomers weren't near enough to actually taking it. Now they're near enough, and they're taking it in large sums, right? By 2026, every baby boomer will be over the age of 62. And by 2029, they'll all be over 65. So there's an onslaught of people that need to make decisions about their Social Security and how to optimize that Social Security in their retirement plan. We're not going to talk about the problems with Social Security. We're not going to talk about all those things because those are things that we've discussed on previous podcasts. But my concern is that conventional wisdom is usually a very narrow focus, meaning a couple of years ago, we started talking about the narrow focus planning trap, which is financial advisors, people tend to make financial decisions in a vacuum as if other things in their life do not exist. So, we single in on a goal and we ignore the fact that we want to accumulate money for a specific goal, such as college. But meanwhile, I have, credit card debt at 18%. And I'm just ignoring that. I got to focus on the college goal. And that credit card debt is eroding my capital, or I'm paying excessive taxes, and that's eroding my capital. Every financial decision that you make impacts something else in your financial strategy. So the focus and the intention of the work is always, as we say on every podcast, the goal is to reduce taxes. It's to reduce risk, reduce fees and costs, to increase the savings rate, increase the benefits and protection around that wealth, most importantly, increase retirement income, and as a residual, as the last goal in the plan, once we've accumulated or accomplished all those other goals, is to pass as much on to your family as you possibly can. Does that make sense?
It absolutely makes sense.
Okay. So what I wanted to start off with is just where we are right now as far as when people can start collecting Social Security. Anybody born between 1943 and 1954, they can get full Social Security at the age of 66. Now, if it's 1955 is your birth date, you get it at 66 and 2 months. If it's 1956, it's 66 and 4 months. You go to 1959, and it's 66 and 10 months. Anybody after 1960 is age 67, okay? And this is something that most people don't even really know when they can collect the full benefit. Now, what we're going to talk about is, your personal circumstances are going to dictate whether this applies to you or not. If you're working and you're 62, 63, 64, 65, 66, and you earn $2 for every $2 that you earn over about $18,000, you will lose $1 in Social Security. So if you're working and you're under the age of 67, this is not going to apply to the conversation. But what I want you to start thinking about is the strategic thinking and how this could impact your retirement plan.
Now, John,
makes sense?
It does.
Yep.
But the conventional wisdom here, what I have heard as the, truth from above is it doesn't matter if it's 67 or whatever. What matters is you delay as long as you possibly can because you will have more money in Social Security. Is that a fair statement?
Correct. And basically what you're looking at is if you take your benefit early, such as you were supposed to get it at 66 in 4 months and you're going to take it down to 62, if you go back 36 months, you're getting about a 6.6% discount every single year that you're taking. And when you go beyond 36 months, you're getting about a 5.2% discount. Okay. So what they're saying is if you defer your Social Security, you're getting over about an average of a 6% increase every single year. And from 67 to 70, it's an 8% deferral. Okay. It's an 8% compounded rate, in essence, on your benefits. You get 32% more benefits. So defer your Social Security and get 32% more in retirement. And I have a chart up on my screen that I'm looking at here that in our comparison cash flow, we have a situation where the person says, I will defer the benefits from 62, out to 70 and start collecting benefits at 70. And by the time this person is 78, the cumulative cash flows have equaled. So it took 16 years to break even. But if I live to 90 years old, I would have collected $778,000 more in Social Security benefits during that time frame. And that's what we're all focused on. Wow, $777,000 more in retirement. That's compelling, right?
That's very compelling.
And it's like the situation is, why would you not do that? Now, my first question is, do you have the 16 years to break even?
Well, none of us are guaranteed those 16 years, right?
Correct. Okay. So we don't know if you have the 16 years or not. But let's assume for a moment that we do. Okay. So I've created a little scenario where the scenario basically says and we've done the calculations and we said, okay, a full, 66 years old, somebody right now could collect, if they're 66, they're going to get $33,000 per year. If they discount it and they get it at 62, they're going to get $24,000. If they defer to 70, they're going to get $42,000. So $24,216 today, or wait, in essence, 8 years and get $42,000. Then in another 8 years, you're going to break even. So that's your 16-year period. What did that do to my wealth? Okay. So what I believe in is that every decision that I make has an equal and opposite reaction somewhere else in my plan. So I am not working today. I am 62 years old and I need to maintain my lifestyle. So if I have accumulated assets, I have to hit those assets to live my life, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now I run into all these other things that we've been talking about, which is with the withdrawal rate risk and all those other risks and longevity risk and all those other things, which Social Security makes sense with. So what we did is we said, let's create a little closed environment and let's add variables as we go. So let's say the person has accumulated $1 million in financial assets. They're 62 years old, and for the moment, we're going to avoid taxation and we're going to avoid inflation, right? Because in addition to getting those 6%, 6.5%, 6.2% increases and the 8% increases, you'd also get an inflationary rise. But what I want to do is I want to omit the inflation from the conversation, and in the moment, I want to omit the taxation, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about the taxation because that's going to play heavily into this as well. So if you think about it, if I'm 62 years old and I need $50,000 a year and I have an account that's making 5% interest, oh, great, where am I going to get that? Well, let's not worry about that now. Let's talk about it conceptually first, okay? The $50,000, I can take that out and enjoy my life, but I'm taking out a 5% withdrawal, which we know from all the studies that that's a high withdrawal rate, and that's going to increase the probability of what?
Running out of money.
I'm running out of money, I'm running out of my capital. So in this first scenario, I said, why don't we take the Social Security at 62, so we'll get to $24,000 a year, so I only have to pull out, a little bit from the portfolio, and I can still reinvest. I only have to pull out $16,000, $26,000 to get to the $50,000 a year of income. I can leave money in my portfolio. So if I do this, right, at 70, I'm going to have $1,267,000 in my portfolio if I took Social Security early. So let's just go over that again. I take Social Security, I take $24,000 in Social Security, and I only have to pull out $26,000 or 2.6 from my portfolio to hit my goals. By the time I get to 70, the same withdrawal is now down to much lower because my portfolio is now $1,267,000 compared to what? Right? So now the comparison is conventional wisdom says, same scenario, let's defer Social Security to 70. So now I have to pull out the $50,000 a year from my portfolio. And every year that I'm doing that, my portfolio, assuming I'm making 5% and there's no market volatility, by the time I get to 69, my portfolio is now $1 million. And I get to the end of 70 where I've taken the $42,000 out now. I now only have $1,042,000 in my portfolio. So now I've got $220,000 left. So we talk about the 5 rules of the institutions, right?
Mm-hmm.
Keep our money, get our money, keep it, push it. Well, the government's also at work. And if I died at 70, who is worse off?
Well, the person who delayed.
The person who delayed, but the family.
Oh, yes.
Now, right? So if I think about it, the survivor aspect of this is one of the compelling conversations in the conversation that when I die, my wife is going to have a choice. Take her Social Security or take mine, whichever one is higher. So she's going to lose the Social Security benefit, right? So in this particular case, she'd have $42,000 versus $24,000, but she'd have a portfolio of, $1,267,000 versus a portfolio of $1 million. She has more capital to offset her loss of earnings. She has more, like if I took that $220,000 and I put it in an annuity, right? And I got a lifetime payment on a 70-year-old female, it's going to produce another $18,000, $19,000 a year, ballpark. It's the same $42,000, but I control the capital. I want to control my capital as much as I can in my retirement. Now, if you take this out a little bit further, and I should have put an 80 here before we did this, and I take it to age 80, the deferred Social Security would have collected the asset value would have been up to about $1.6 million, assuming no inflation and no other pressures anywhere else on the plan. If I had taken the Social Security early, and now my wealth at age 80, if I took it early, is $1,740,000. So I still got $240,000 more of capital. I got $240,000 more to help me out with my. Don't they tell us that medical expenses for the average individual in retirement are going to be $240,000? I got an extra $240,000. Somehow they've convinced us that we're going to collect, to age 90, $778,000 more, but it doesn't necessarily show up in your bank account, in your financial plan. And with an extra, I got an extra $240,000 at 70, I got an extra $240,000 all the way through the plan. You can always, create strategies to increase the income, but you still have more asset to pass to your family. You have tax control. You have all these things that you don't have in the other scenarios.
So unpack this for us just a little bit more. So we're going to back up. The conventional wisdom is, yes, you would have more money longer term. You talked about break even times. You talked about really, if you have those 12 years for the break even. But I want the audience to understand that what John is doing right now is he has proprietary software that he can walk you through any kind of scenario. I'm maybe not any, almost every kind of scenario, especially the pressures that he's talked about on these podcasts since we began, and plug them into this software to show you how this stuff affects. This is a conversation that you're not going to have with a regular, financial advisor down the street. This takes a substantial amount of expertise. It takes a substantial amount of experience, and it really makes a lot of sense when you start processing all of these numbers. So what else do you have with this? I mean, what else do we need to know in order for clients, prospects, people in the general public who are listening to this who really do think that they need to have an analysis like this done?
Because it comes down to your plan is unique, and the financial decisions and the pressures that are impacting your plan are different than anybody else's plan. Yes, we share the same commonalities. We have tax pressure, we have family pressure, we have longevity pressure, we have geopolitical risk, we have all these things that are impacting us differently, but that unique dynamic mix of you and your family and your assets and your lifestyle and your spending habits is going to dictate whether or not what's going to be right, whether or not your plan is going to be successful. But what's right for you is not necessarily right for your neighbor, and vice versa. So when we look at this, I always talk about strategic thinking, right? It's the thinking and the questions that are going to make a difference in your financial strategy. And my father, who, we worked together for 25 years, he used to have this sign that he would carry around with him, is that, conventional wisdom is always wrong. That was one of them, okay? Usually. And then I got to say that from a compliance standpoint, all right? But also, complex problems have simple, easy to understand answers, which is never the case, right? And your mix and what you're trying to achieve is what's most important. So if you and I are sitting down and talking about your plan, number one goal is I want to reduce the taxes currently on my plan and the expenses on my plan through the entire time frame. I want to be better prepared for all the risks that are coming at me. I want to make sure that I reduce the fees and the expenses in my plan. Well, if I have $1 million versus $1,267,000, that has nothing to do with fees. That's just because I had a decision to take less money, right? Or more money from my portfolio sooner, which puts me in a position where I now have liquidity problems. And the problem is, I haven't met a person ever in my 28 years who's living only on Social Security that was happy, okay? So that pressure's coming at us. So my point here is the thinking is what's right, how do I make a decision? And I have to tell you that these variables, if I add taxation into this and I add inflation into this and I change the interest rate and I put market volatility on this, and you start doing all these different things, and I say, my father was thoroughly convinced that he was going to defer his Social Security to 70. And when he turned 68, there was a lot of discussion going on in the marketplace at the time that they were going to minimize Social Security or they were going to change it, and he felt threatened, and he took it because he felt if he was taking it, it would be less likely that they would impact it if he was taking it. Now, in hindsight, which you don't have when you make a financial decision, is you don't have the 5 years or 6 years since that point, he'll never make the break-even point because of, well, he might because he's a medical miracle, but it's the odds are against him, right? And he has all the defense, he has all the protection, and he has everything in his plan, but this Social Security, he used to take the money, and him and my mother early, they would go on vacations, and they would, people would say, oh, the cruise is really expensive. And my father would say the government's paying for it. And they'd look at him like cross-eyed, like, what are you talking about? He goes, yeah, I took my Social Security early and I'm going on vacations with the Social Security money. Right? And that's his sense of humor. But it's, those vacations I took were pretty darn special. And you're never going to, if he had deferred that, he would never have that enjoyment. So it's not just the math, right? People get into this, that the math is the math is the math is the math. And math is not anything to do with the financial plan. It's the emotions of my goals and how I'm going to implement those goals, how I'm going to achieve those goals, and how I'm going to maximize my retirement income at all phases, and why on the forefront, it makes perfect sense to basically defer 8 years and go from 24,000 to 42,000. But then you have to look at age 70 and you have to say, well, was the money qualified? And now I have this, required minimum distribution. And now my Social Security is 42,000. And now I hit that special retirement income where my Medicare premium on Part B goes from, $138 to $267 a person. And now I'm paying more Medicare premiums. And I'm paying more, my taxation on my assets is more because my Social Security is being taxed more. There's so many ripples, right? In my training and my history was, the visual was this. A decision is not one to itself. If I throw a rock into a pond, the ripples, no matter the size of the pond, no matter the size of the splash, the ripples will hit every piece of shoreline at some time, and they will impact that shoreline in different ways, right? And that is something that is unique to you. So my position on this is, if you're 5 years from retirement, you're 10 years from retirement, you need to start making a plan to understand when I should throw the switch on Social Security. And it has nothing to do with the amount of money that you've accumulated or not accumulated. I mean, that's an important part of it. But it has to do with the efficiency of that short-term and long-term, and we need to measure it for your individual circumstances. Without those individual circumstances being, thought about strategically, it's not ever going to be the right plan for you. And the issue is that, if I delayed Social Security and I'm 69 years old and I have a liquidity event in my life where, we did that video that's on our website that highlights about 38 different financial pressures, and I have a medical emergency, or my kids need money, or, I have some other event, or I have an opportunity to do something wonderful. I'm now putting more pressure on my assets, and I'm now depleting my assets, so I now have less money in the future because I haven't accumulated as much money. I mean, there's so many factors. I don't mean to go off on a tangent, but that's what I like to do. But I want to get you thinking strategically. And I want you to know that the decisions for you are not necessarily the decisions that are being promoted by conventional wisdom, and every site that I log in is defer, defer, defer. Mm-hmm. I just don't get it. Yes, it might be the right decision in the end, but how do you know it until you've looked at the pros and cons? And most of the decisions don't look at the pros and cons. They say, look at this pie chart, you're going to have $777,000 more if you defer your Social Security to 70. And a lot of advisors are saying, oh my God, that's the right thing. Mm-hmm. And meanwhile, they've got a 6% or 7% withdrawal rate on their money to break even on their expenses.
Which is not sustainable.
It's not sustainable, and they're going to run out of money. Mm-hmm. And, the other question is, it's a pension. A Social Security is a government-funded pension, right? Mm-hmm. Upon my demise, it goes away. If I die and Sharon's alive, she loses hers and gets mine. She still has this tremendous economic loss. Mm-hmm. I want her to have more money at that time. What's my strategy going to do to provide that more money? Is it going to be the Social Security? Do I have guaranteed income from other sources? Do I have life insurance in retirement? Do I have other backups and redundancies that are going to help me protect against this erosion that's at me? Mm-hmm. So to kind of wrap this up and kind of put this in, break even is 16 years depending upon the person and the date of birth. The break even is going to be different for everybody.
Yep.
Okay. Your health should dramatically play into this thinking. Your longevity potential should dramatically play into this thinking. Your withdrawal rate, your personal income tax circumstances, your family makeup, your other assets, all these things need to be factored in, and you need to put yourself through what we're going to call some financial pressure that is going to simulate, the whole idea is to take the plan and say, okay, let's simulate some stuff, some bad things happening. How does the plan work? Now let's change a variable. Let's take inflation and make it 3%. How does the plan work? Let's say I get inflation at 3%, but my Social Security, because I've accumulated a lot of assets, I get, some sort of means testing where I don't get that. Who knows, right? Mm-hmm. How does that impact my plan? What if I've accumulated too much assets and I don't get the Social Security, or it gets means tested away from me? Because you have to remember what I said on the open of this is currently by 2026, every baby boomer will be over the age of 62. By 2029, every boomer will be over 65. So that's the next, 8 years?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Everybody's going to continue. They're going to start collecting. Currently, Social Security, Medicare account for $2 trillion of the $4 trillion budget that we have. By 2022, that's going to be $2.3 trillion, according to some of the studies that I am reading. The unfunded liability of the two programs combined by 2022 is $42 trillion.
Oh, geez.
So we take this as like it's going to happen. I think it's going to happen. I'm a pretty optimistic kind of guy. But if you're successful, it may or may not be. And if you're under the age of 50 and you're planning, we for years have been removing Social Security from the plan and saying, if you get it, go on vacation with it like my dad did, right? Mm-hmm. But don't count on it.
Now,
right? So that's kind of what I want people to start thinking about is strategically think about your decisions. I can defer Social Security. I can collect it at, 63, 64, 65, 70. Which one's right for me? If I'm working, I'm going to defer to 66. If I'm working and I'm now 66 and I'm collecting the Social Security, should I collect it? Should I not collect it? Does it throw me into a higher tax bracket? Mm-hmm. These are things that need to be looked at. And then, when you start looking at somebody that's deferring, I see this mistake happen all the time, not to go off on another tangent, but they use all their non-qualified assets during the first 5 years of retirement. They defer their Social Security and they defer their IRAs, and now they have an RMD and a higher Social Security. Most people might end up in a higher tax bracket, and if the Trump tax law is sunset, you will end up in a higher tax bracket than you are today.
Yep.
But again, don't know if that's going to happen.
I think the highlight that I want to just make, just being on the sidelines here, is it is not cookie cutter. You have to keep that in mind when it comes to your financial planning. If your plan looks like everybody else's plan, it's not a plan. It's somebody else's map. Unless you really break down all of the different contingencies and that are your contingencies, not Joe Smith on the road's contingencies, that changes absolutely everything and could potentially make such an impact on what your retirement looks like that could be a big, huge game changer. More people plan more for their vacations, like John was saying his dad took, than they plan for retirement. And sitting down with a professional is vitally important.
And one last thing, if you would like to set up a no obligation financial consultation with one of our advisors, including myself, you can go to our website. You can request what we call a wealth curve pressure identifier conversation. It's a free, no obligation, 30-minute conversation. We're going to find out as much about you as we possibly can and understand what your unique dynamics are. And then from there, we can talk about how we may or may not be able to help you. And that's a free, no obligation service that we provide to you. We have 7 or 8 of them scheduled each week or available in our calendars. We ask you to request them, and we have that conversation.
Fantastic. And the website again?
SmallwoodAssociates.com.
All right. So, John, thank you for your thought leadership today.
Matt, thank you for your guidance and putting this together, and I look forward to seeing you next time.
Yep. And if you have not subscribed to the podcast yet, make sure you hit that subscribe now button below. That way, every time John comes out with a new podcast, it'll show up directly on your listening device. For John Smallwood, this is Matt Haller, and we'll see you on the other side of the mic very soon.
Welcome to the end of the video. Smallwood Wealth Management is an investment advisor representative. The opinions expressed by Smallwood Wealth Management and guests on this show are their own. All statements and opinions expressed are based upon information considered reliable, although it should not be relied upon as such. Any statements or opinions are subject to change without notice. Information presented for this educational purposes only. Moreover, no listener should assume that any discussions or information presented serves as a receipt of or substitute for personalized advice from Smallwood Wealth Management or from any other investment professional and is not intended as an offer of solicitation for the sale or purchase of any specific securities, investments, or investment strategies. Smallwood Wealth Management is not a law firm or an accounting firm, and no portion of this presentation should be interpreted as legal, accounting, or tax advice. Information expressed does not take into account your specific situation or objectives and is not intended as a recommendations appropriate for any individual. Listeners are encouraged to seek advice from a qualified tax, legal, or investment advisor to determine whether any information presented may be suitable for their specific situation. Thank you for listening.